8. As the weeks went by, gradually the retaining walls were finished and young plants flourished on the level bits of ground they provided. Ooh. Honeysuckle, petunias, stocks and pansies, all the lovely blossoms of early summer. Climbing rose reached eagerly up the rough bark of the fir tree at the corner of my cabin. Tight green buds appeared. Soon they would unfold, I hoped, into the lovely roses that had been pictured on the box in which it came. I had very little irrigating to do. Frequent gentle rains lasting for only an hour or two had taken care of that chore for me. Everything was wonderful. Of course, I would stay out the full year, the time I had set for myself to remain in these idyllic surroundings. One morning right after breakfast, I determined to spend the day writing letters to friends. I assembled paper, pen, and ink. I sat down at the kitchen table. I hadn't gotten very far when I heard the boys' jalopy stop with a rattle and a bang on the road below me. Dear Sir came running up the trail leading Vicky, his beautiful little English shepherd dog. We're going to a mill near Arcata to get some lumber, dear madam. Be gone several days. I'm leaving Vicky with you for protection. How nice, I said, holding out my arms to the beautiful creature, but she turned an imploring look on Dear Sir and ignored me. Don't mind if she isn't friendly at first. She's not a one-man dog, and in a day or two she will love you as much as she does me. Maybe more. I'm giving her to you for keeps. That is, as long as you are on the river. You need a real protector, living alone up here as you do. Thank you, dear sir. That's kind and thoughtful of you. While I spoke, thoughts raced through my mind. The boys were going away, even though for only a few days. What about my assessment work? I'd have to screw up my courage and ask. Just a minute, I said. I am concerned about the legal status of my claim. Today's the 2nd of June, and Don't you worry your head 1 minute about that, he interrupted me. Everything will be all right. If it isn't too much trouble, would you go up to Bent Pine once or twice to see if the chickens are all right? We've turned the kids out with the nannies. They'll take care of themselves for a few days. So long. We'll be seeing you. He gave me the end of Vicky's rope and went down the trail at a lively pace, leaving me feeling a little indignant. Now why, I thought, won't he talk to me about my assessment work? Why does he have to be so mysterious? Just then Vicky tugged at the rope and howled plaintively. I pulled her into the kitchen and closed the door. I had heard a good deal about Vicky from the boys and seen her several times. First, the night Dear Sir and I had stopped at Bent Pine and eaten supper there, and later as she accompanied the men up the trail to the mine, which she sometimes did. But I'd never really tried to get acquainted with her. Now I set about doing just that. I ran my hands through her silky hair, gently scratched her velvety ears, and talked to her as if we were already in love with each other. After a bit, Vicky put her forelegs on my knees and laid her head on my breast, looking at me with big, intelligent eyes. I understood her. She was saying in dog language, I love you. Be good to me and I will be faithful. I went back to my letter writing, with Vicky's head resting on my foot. After an hour or so, I opened the cabin door, but Vicky showed no disposition to go out. She continued to lie on the floor, her luminous brown eyes following me as I moved about. Vicky, I said to her, you know what I need? Something to love me and then ask no questions, that doesn't know or care if I am old or young, good-natured or ill-tempered, well-dressed or slovenly, sad or gay, but just me, an old woman who wants to be loved for what she is, right now. I think Vicky read my thoughts in her dog's way. She came close to me and licked my hand. From that time on, we were understanding friends. The afternoon wore away. It grew dark early. My letters finished at last, I went to the door and looked out. Black clouds tumbled and raced across the sky. The wind sighed fitfully through the forest that surrounded me. There came a low grumbling from the distant peaks. Vicky heard it too, and roused herself, growled in a protest. She knows what that grumbling's about, I thought, and she doesn't like it. I don't like it either. I'd better get these letters down to the mailbox before rain starts falling in earnest. I hastily stamped the letters and put them in my little waterproof mail bag. We made our way down the trail to my doghouse-sized mailbox, where I hung the bag with a clothespin so Tom could snatch it off without stopping the truck as he went by in the early morning. We hastened back to the cabin, and I lighted a lamp and prepared a quick supper for Vicky and me. Before we had finished eating, thunder was reverberating from the canyon walls with horrid broken rhythm and intermittently flashing its anger at us. Vicky stood it as long as she could, then ran, belly low, across the cabin and dived under my bed. I tried to keep my courage up, but my thoughts would return to the story dear Sir had told me about a man who lived in Happy Camp, whose cabin was built under a tall tree. In a recent thunderstorm, lightning had struck the tree, jumped from the tree to cabin, and gutted it, leaving the man homeless and half dead from shock. Not a pleasant thought when I knew that my own cabin was not only under, but actually leaned against a fir tree over 200 feet tall. Why anyone in his right mind should build a cabin so close to a big tree would be known only by the miner who did it. I hadn't given the tree much thought, but now, with the thunder sounding closer every minute, I went to have a look at it. In the deepening twilight, the lightning seemed even more terrifying. I never did pose as enjoying a thunderstorm like some people I know. I've always felt about thunderstorms as Vicky does. I couldn't dive under my bed because sliding under beds has never been one of my accomplishments. I determined to count between the flashes and following roll of thunder. At first, I could count 20. Nothing to be scared of yet, I assured myself. And about my tree, it had stood in this spot on the mountainside for generations unharmed. A grand, friendly tree to be trusted. Why should it turn traitor to humankind tonight just because I happen to be living under it? I tried this form of reasoning with myself, but it didn't work. It's hard to pin yourself down to reason when another part of you is in abject terror. I ducked back into the cabin, pulled a shawl over my head to shut out the blinding flashes, but soon I found out that lightning has a way of penetrating your eyelids in a way no mere shawl can stop. Then came the blinding flash my nerves were preparing me for. Flash and crash that was like a falling of a million tin pins all the same instant. Echo reverberations were deafening. I grabbed a canvas cover off a chair, flung the door open, and plunged down the trail to a sheltered nook under the hill. There I cowered close to the ground. Vicky crowded against me, shaking with fear. I put my arms around her and pulled her under the canvas with me. Another blinding flash directly overhead, and Vicky and I slid down on our bellies and hugged the earth while the terrifying din of thunder split the echoes in the canyon. And then came the rain. Big, heavy drops. A few seconds later, the pelting downfall wet me to the skin. I lifted a corner of the canvas and saw that across the canyon my beautiful mountain prospect was lighted with several blazing trees that stood like giant torches. I counted 6 of these fires, then covered my head with the soggy canvas to lie prone on the ground while Vicky licked my face in an agony of fright. I had forgotten to pray. I hadn't called on God to protect me in my craven fear. Soon I knew the worst was over because the thunder grew less powerful, the flashes farther apart. In some unorthodox way, I had become conscious of God's presence. I knew that if He had wanted me, He could have let the lightning take me. Something like comfort and peace pervaded my soul. I dragged myself up from the ground, and Vicky and I, clinging close together, dribbled up the muddy, slippery trail to the cabin. Fir cones were falling thick and fast on the roof. The rain pelted it like falling bullets. I pulled off my wet clothes and crept into my warm, dry bed. Vicky gave one final lick on my hand and crawled under the bed. Dear God, it's over, I thought prayerfully. Dear God, dear God. But in spite of all the nervous strain and emotional exhaustion, I couldn't sleep. Maybe it was because the rats in the attic and the mice that scampered over my floor every night gathered in greater numbers than ever before and held high carnival. The boys' traps had done no good at all in the ridding of me of the pests. I myself would take measures against the 4-footed fiends. When next morning dawned, I would stir up a large batch of shredded newspapers and flour paste. With this homemade paper mache, I would stuff every crack in my cabin. That would fix them, I thought savagely, listening to them scurry and squeak and chatter. Toward morning, I fell asleep. Next morning broke clear and golden. No sound of rats or mice. I hoped they had gone out into the forest, because today I was going to do something that would result to the disadvantage of any who remained. They would starve to death, that's what. Then I remembered the chickens at Bent Pine claim that I was supposed to feed today. My murderous intentions towards the rodents who were joint tenants of my cabin would have to wait, but not for long. Maybe I could find some old newspapers at the boys' cabin. If so, I'd bring them home with me, and Vicky licked my hand. I took the hint and got up. After breakfast, I inspected the garden, front, back, and terraces. My flowers had come through the storm very well. Most of them had lifted their faces from the mud into which had been pelted by the heavy rain. They looked fresh and happy, with their heads bowing, turning this way and that in the soft breeze. Then I prepared to go up the road to look after the chickens at Bent Pine. I was in honor bound to keep my promise to do so, though I didn't particularly care for the half-mile walk along the road. I fully sensed that I was very much alone in that part of the Klamath Forest, so I put my little Ivor Johnson into a handbag and started off, Vicky running ahead, waving her tail happily. I followed her down the trail. When Vicky reached the bars, she stopped suddenly and stood motionless for a moment, then started to move off into the underbrush, making a low growling sound. I reached the bars and looked down. The earth was soft from the night's rain, and there, clear and sharp, were several tracks such as the one I had seen in my backyard when planting Millicent's chrysanthemums. Big round tracks with no marks of toenails, so no dog had made them. What then? I hadn't the faintest idea. Vicky came back, still growling, as if she hated to give up, but knew her duty was to stay with me. I had almost overpowering impulse to run back up the trail, lock myself and Vicky in the cabin, but that wouldn't do. I had a duty to perform at Bent Pine, and no mere tracks are going to stop me. I dismissed my fright and set off up the road, resolutely thinking of other things. As I hurried along, I was in danger of getting cross-eyed with trying to keep one eye on the curving, narrow road and the other eye on the overhanging wild lilacs that grew on the bank and reached out long branches of misty flowers that tempted my thoughts away from temporal things such as hungry chickens. I had never before seen such a living curtain of feathery blossoms. Most of the blooms were white or blue, but sometimes there was a great cluster that was shell pink. Vicky slipped through the gate at Bent Pine. I shut it behind us, and we walked down the short road to the cabin. On one side of the road, I saw a spacious tool house that I had seen only dimly in the darkness on my previous visit here. I stopped in amazement. Now, I am no stickler for meticulous neatness, quite the contrary, but the astonishing disorder of this place shocked me. Most of the floor was covered with cartons holding old boots, ragged scraps of blankets, odd-looking pieces of rusty iron whose uses were unknown to me, and other mysterious objects. On a black, oily workbench lay a confusion of small tools, pieces of pipe, bolts, nails, screw, and so on. A complete inventory was impossible, piled to the depth of 6 inches in places. My fingers inched to get at this, to sort, assemble, and otherwise bring order out of this chaos, but I knew that was impossible at the moment. It would take too long. Now I must get on with the business at hand. Reluctantly, I walked on, promising myself that some day, when I had 6 or 7 free hours ahead of me, I would help dear Sir out by putting his tool house in order so he could find things when he wanted them. Entering the cabin, I looked through the cupboards and boxes for the chicken feed, finding it shortly. Surprisingly, and totally unlike the tool house, here in the cabin everything was in order and shining clean. There's no accounting for men, I thought. Some men, anyway, and of these dear Sir was assuredly one. My mind touched lightly and a bit fretfully on the matter of my assessment work. I went down to the fenced chicken yard, watered and fed my temporary charges. They fluttered and squawked wildly on seeing a woman approach and enter their sacred purlieus. 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 I will look it up later. But I paid them no mind. If there is any living thing sillier than a chicken, I have never met it. After putting the chicken feed can away, I glanced around the room looking for old newspapers. Wonderful! A whole stack, none dated less than 2 weeks before. I took what I could comfortably carry. On my way back to the main road, I dug up a few iris rhizomes I saw near the gate. I am a natural-born flower thief. I'd risk arrest any time to filch a slip or bulb that has caught my fancy. through a fence, along a walk in a public park, anywhere. I suffer a sort of moral blackout when I covet a flower. My pockets bulging with loot and my arms full of old newspapers, Vic and I left Bent Pine and went home. Several hours of daylight remained. I would tear up the newspapers, put the result to soak overnight, make a bucket of thick flour paste, and be ready next day to stuff the cracks against my enemies, the rats and mice that robbed me of my sleep. Then, forever free of those pests, how sweet would be my rest through the long, quiet, peaceful nights.